then, and I left the job as principal keeper in the lighthouse service. And I joined the job first in 1952. I came across from Ireland, and I went to Blackwall, the lighthouse training school in Blackwall, for 2 months. At that time you spent 1 month training in how to light a paraffin light, and then you did another month in metalwork and carpentry. You did a fortnight in metalwork and a fortnight in carpentry. You made a metal box, and you also made a wooden box. And then after that time, then you were taught as well, of course, obviously, how to make bread and a little bit of cooking. And then you went out, you were called out to a station, you were sent out for further training to stations as a supernumerary assistant keeper. And you came back to Blackwall from time to time and went on from there. And then eventually you got appointed to a station as an assistant keeper, and you stayed at that particular station for a number of years. As a supernumerary, of course, you travelled mostly around the country, or into, and you got appointed to districts. You see, the lighthouse service was divided up into 4 districts at that time, and you got appointed to a district, you see, and then you usually served on the lighthouses in that district. The first lighthouse I went to was Trevose Head in Cornwall in 1952, and my first watch was the middle watch there after travelling from London, and I was afraid to touch anything in case it blew up on my face. And I remember I called the keeper in charge. I was relieving the principal keeper who was ill, and I called the keeper in charge an hour too early. I thought he said call me at 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and instead he said call me at 4. And of course, when I called him at 3, he thought something had happened, and he came running up the stairs. To see what was wrong, you see. So I spent a month on that lighthouse, and then they sent me to St. Mary's Lighthouse then from, not St. Mary's, sorry, St. Bees Lighthouse from Trevose. And I spent a month up there at St. Bees. In the Lake District there, it was always my ambition to have a look at the Lake District, and I was able to go there for free. And I was with an old principal keeper there called Tom Pay. I was staying in his house actually, because at that time there was no supernumerary accommodation, and you stayed usually with the principal keeper, and paid him sort of lodgings, and they looked after me well there. And then from there I went down to St. Mary's Lighthouse. The principal keeper there was Pat Murphy, the present Pat's father actually. And there, of course, it was all paraffin lights at the time, of course, and we had supers quarters there. We had an open fire there, open grate, and we used to go around, walk along the coast and pick up sea coal to put on the fire to supplement our stock of lighthouse coal. And that was my first experience of showing visitors around the St. Mary's Lighthouse. And
by Seco, you mean stuff that had been ditched in the sea?
yes, they've been washed up from. You see, there was a mine apparently running about 2 or 3 miles out under the sea from nearby there somewhere, and every time there was a storm or the approach of a storm, the alarm bells used to ring in the mine apparently, and the miners used to come up to the surface apparently. This is what we heard, at that time. And then that sea coal, as they call it, that was just washed up on the beach, you see, possibly from that mine, I don't know, you see, but it was quite good. It was excellent. It burned excellently. Then from there, then I went down to, I think I went to Bardsey from there. No, I went to South Stack from there, I think, and spent a month there. And then from there, then I went to Bardsey Lighthouse and had a month on that. And then I got appointed to the Smalls. Then after that, and I spent about 18 months there at the Smalls, and then this was about my second year in the job, and then I resigned then from there and joined the R.I.F. and spent 5 years in the R.I.F. and then came back and rejoined the Lighthouse Service again. And my first station, I think, in the Lighthouse Service, at that time, the second time in the job, I think I went to Lundy South, I think. And then I went to Flatholm. This was, of course, obviously then the training had been shifted to Harwich. The training school had shifted to Harwich this time. And we spent a month in training school in Harwich, learning how to light the paraffin light still, and how to make bread again. And at that time, of course, we had sorry about that. we just spent 1 month. The metalwork and the woodwork had been cut out of the program, and then we went out to Lundy South, to there for a month, and then after that I went to Flatholm, and then I think I went back to Lundy North again then, once or twice, and then went to St Anne's for a month, and then I got appointed to Skocum then. I got appointed to Strumblehead actually, and I spent about 2 years at Strumblehead, and then I went to Skocum then after there, and spent about 5 years or 6 years at Skocum, and then they sent me up to South Stack, and then I got made principal keeper then from there, when they introduced the month on, month off, and they appointed me principal keeper to Skocum, and then I spent 5 years at Skocum as principal keeper, and then went back to South Stack for about 2 years again, and then I went to Skerries Lighthouse for 5. And then I went back to South Stack then for about 12 months before it actually went automatic. And then I got transferred then to the Wolf Rock, and then spent about 2 years on the Wolf, and then got transferred up to Holyhead Control Centre, the old Holyhead depot here And by that time, of course, a lot of the lighthouses were automatic, and we monitored them in the depot, the North Wales lights in the depot on computers. And then spent about 5 years in the depot, I think it was 5. And then in the 3rd of October 1994, I retired from the service after 34 years in the job. That's unbroken service, and of course with the former service I had, it would have been about 36 years. So and that's my story, I think.
Right. If you go back to the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
you're married with children.
Yes.
Where did you meet Megan?
Oh yes, I met Megan on South Stack Lighthouse actually when one Sunday afternoon as a supernumerary when I was first in the job, and they came down to Megan and 3 or 4 other girls came down to the lighthouse on a Sunday afternoon, and we were taking photographs outside, and we got talking to them, and we invited them in for tea, and from there we went on, and that was it. We got married, we got engaged and married eventually, but the first time I actually saw her was through a telescope at the top of the steps. So
Was that with L.O. Williams?
yes, L.O. Williams was he was the keeper in charge then at that time, and it was also, there was an old PK called Cecil Tresice was there as well, and Joe Turvey was another assistant keeper there, and a supernumerary with me was Simon Reynolds as well. He was there as well, and Jack Mayburn then was another principal keeper who was there when I was there again, and he was the chap who was taking the photographs when I met Megan, who was in the group, I should say, and he invited the girls to stand in the group, and took a photograph of them all. So and that was it. Then we went to I went to Smalls after that, and then of course we got married. I left the job then and went into the RAF, and I got married on embarkation leave, and I before going overseas, and we had a short about 2 days honeymoon, and I never saw Megan again for about 18 months after we got married. That was it. But at that time we did 2 months on and a month off, and it was quite. It wasn't very nice for married families, married people at all. It was quite a long stint on the lighthouse actually.
Did you end up missing a lot of your kids' upbringing then?
Yes, we did actually, and of course, obviously, the thing was as well that the children were in the best of health when you were home on your month's leave, and when you were away, they came down with everything from measles, the flu, and all sorts of things, and our wives had to be father and mother to the families, to the children, and we well, at least that's what seemed to happen in my family anyway, that the children were always on their best behaviour when I was home. So
now, when you were at Lynmouth there was an automatic fog signal.
That's right.
Can you
Yes,
tell
it
us
was. It was. They'd just taken it out of service actually, and it was it was something like out of Jules Verne. It was an automatic explosive fog gun, and it had a barrel a big barrel inside in the building, filled with tonite charges, and the detonators were actually put onto these charges, and then there was a sort of a conveyor belt then, and an arm which used to pick up one charge at a time and bring it up onto the outside arm, and then it would explode the fog signal, the charge on at a certain time. You see, I can't remember the exact timing of the signal now, but it could have been two explosives every minute, or one every 5 minutes, or whatever. I can't quite remember now. And it worked quite well in theory, and but unfortunately, of course, the weather wasn't taken into account. Well, it was, but it wasn't really taken into account when they actually built the thing. And you get your charge out onto the arm, and then it might be blowing a gale, and the charge would wrap itself around the arm by the detonator, by the wires of the detonator, and when it was time to go off, the charge would explode, and of course it would damage the end of the arm. So they thought, well, all right, we'll overcome that. We'll put lead weights on the end of each charge. So they got lots of little lead discs that you put on the end of the charge, and that worked quite well actually for a while, until at the end of when you sounded for fog at the end of the period, then of course you had to collect all the fallen discs that were outside, that had fallen from the charge after it exploded, and it had fallen outside, of course, outside the fog signal house. But over a period of time, of course, then that level ground underneath the fog signal, by the fog signal house there, became a sort of depressed, you see, and of course when it rained, you were scrabbling about in a huge pool of water trying to pick up all your lead discs. And then another thing with it as well, the arm that was picking up the tonite charges off the drum sometimes would scoop up more than one, and you might have a little group of charges going up on the conveyor belt out onto the outside arm, and they'd all go off together. So it was quite a bit of a hit and miss affair, but it did work. Usually worked quite well actually, except with these odd hiccups. You see.
What sort of year was this?
This was about must have been about the late. Let me see now, about the early mid-50s approximately it would be, I'm sure. And then of course they, when I actually got there to Lynmouth as to do a stint there, they had stopped using it, and they had put in a temporary electric fog signal then, you see. When I went there, it was I was a week overdue getting there. Actually, it was very bad snow there, and I was a week overdue getting off the place as well. We had to do the relief eventually by sled over the mountain, and all the water froze up on us, and we had to get water in buckets from the tanks up the road, and we had to hack through about 4 feet of ice when we get drinking water from the and carry it in buckets on our down back to the lighthouse. So,
Now you went to the Smalls.
yeah,
What sort of year was that?
Smalls. I went to Smalls in about 1953, I think it was 1953, and then I was about 18 months, nearly. I think about 18 months on the Smalls then.
Was it helicopters then or boats?
Oh no, it was boats then. Of course, obviously, the helicopters didn't come in till the 70s. With the we used to do the relief by the old ship here, the Argus, and it was a 10-hour journey from Holyhead to the Smalls, and usually when the Argus put her nose out of Holyhead, it used to blow up anyway, and we'd be we'd be a few days perhaps on the Argus, sheltering in Milford Haven or Fishguard. Of course, it also had to do, besides the Smalls, it also had to do the South Bishop Lighthouse. I went to the South Bishop as well, actually. The South Bishop Lighthouse, it had to do Skocum, and as well as the Smalls. Of course, they'd always tried to do the Smalls first because that was the nasty place. And if there was a landing in Smalls, they would try to get there first.
Now, was the Smalls step off the boat or was it a winch?
No, a step off the boat. It was.
I say step off the boat.
Yes. Step onto the onto the steps. You came off the boat onto the steps, and then up the steps onto the landing. And then of course we had a hand winch there then to take all the gear. Everything was piled on the landing, then you see, and then we had to hand winch all the stuff up. The entrance door, of course, was about 20 feet up the tower, and we had one time we got all the gear washed overboard immediately it was landed, and the Argus had to go around salvaging all the what was floating, and we lost most of our food, except the stuff that floated in the boxes, of course. And all the tin stuff was saved. The vegetables, the bags of potatoes, of course, we never saw them again. And our meat was gone, and the Argus had to go into Milford Haven and restock us again.
So when I said step ashore, you quite often had to jump.
Oh yes, and it was quite a treacherous landing as well, because like the Wolf now, for instance, that was a landing where it was either on or off. With the Smalls, you could possibly do it. It might be quiet enough to do it, but while you were in there, it could turn nasty, and it was rather dangerous, to take chances, and it was very, very unreliable, really, unless it was a flat, calm day, of course, obviously. But the Wolf had no problems like that because it was either you could do the relief or you couldn't. There were no half measures. And so they did one relief there on the Smalls one Christmas, apparently just before Christmas, and a big wave came over the back of the landing and it swamped the boat, and the boat was all you could see of the boat was the top of the canopy and the coxswain's head. And the boat was still, he actually got the boat out of the gut. The engine was still running. And they dropped the other boat, of course, and they managed to tow it back to the ship. But the boat crew and the keepers were all marooned. There were about, I think it was about 5 keepers, and the boat crew, there were about 4 or 5 of them. They were all marooned on Smalls over Christmas. So it wasn't a very nice Christmas for them there. And of course the ship couldn't get near the landing for quite a while.
What was it like inside the Smalls?
At that time, in the 50s, it was quite roomy actually, and very, very comfortable at that time, because we had I think it was a Rayburn cooker stove, Rayburn stove, I think, in the kitchen, and it was of course that heated the tower from the kitchen up really, and it was quite warm. The room underneath the kitchen, that only had cupboards in it, big oak cupboards for our food. There was plenty of room there. The bunks, of course, were still the same as they are, well as they were, today. Like really, they were oak bunks, curved with the wall, and 4 bunks. 4 bunks there were, and then the service room then, of course, had a low light in the service room, and it had a desk, the big high chair at the desk, and it was quite warm, and you kept your watch in the service room at that time, because not from sort of regulations, but it was quite comfortable to keep your watch there, and it was much easier to do that there, keep your watch in the service room. And it was, but then later on, of course, obviously, they when they modernised the Smalls, they put equipment everywhere, and the old desk disappeared, and the chair disappeared, lovely comfortable chair disappeared, and they had boxes on every little bit of space that they could find, and there was hardly room to swing a cat eventually in the Smalls.
Did you have fridges then?
No, in the beginning we didn't have fridges. The fridges came about the mid-50s, I think, or just before I left, I think. There were paraffin fridges, and they worked quite well. But before that, what we used to do was we used to do potted meat, like more or less tins of stewing beef now. But we used to do it ourselves. We used to cook the meat, and we used to cut up the stewing beef into pieces and put them in jam jars, and then put dripping on top, and then heat the oven. The oven would be on the lowest setting possible, and we'd put all the jars in the bottom of the oven and leave them cook for hours, very, very slowly, of course, obviously, because any quicker and the glass would crack in the jam jars. Then after quite a long time, it was we took the jars out and let them cool, and you had when they cooled, you had a layer of dripping on top of the jar, and you had all your cooked meat underneath the fat, and that lasted you. There was no need to put that in the fridge, of course, because it was completely sealed by the fat. If there was a little bit of meat sticking out of the fat, you had to eat that straight away, well, more or less straight away, because otherwise that meat would go bad eventually, because on account of the that little piece sticking up through the fat. But if the fat was unbroken, you could keep that for months upon months, and it wouldn't go bad. And it was quite tasty as well, actually. Because the first day on the lighthouse after you did your relief, of course, obviously everybody got out there stewing beef, and the table, it was like a butcher's shop. Everybody was cutting up their stewing beef and putting them into the jam jars, and then that lasted you all the month.
Fresh fruit and veg if you're on 2 months.
Yeah, you got fruit, you got veg, of course, obviously, the month with you, and fresh fruit, and then when 1 month was up, of course, you reordered. Although you were staying for another month, you sent your order ashore via the radio telephone, and the grocer sent it out with the keeper who was coming out, to relieve the other keeper there who had done his 2 months, and
so you never.
So you did actually have only 1 month's food at a time. You see, you didn't have to order the 2 months' food altogether. But obviously, of course, everybody ordered, instead of ordering just 4 weeks supply of food, they ordered approximately at least 5 weeks supply, because during that time, of course, the reliefs were unreliable with the weather, and you could be overdue for weeks, a couple of weeks there. You see, so you always had to carry an extra supply of food. You see, in your cupboards. So everybody usually ordered about five weeks supply instead of 4. You see.
Did these vegetables keep well, or did you rely on tin stuff?
No, we used these what do they call them? Cow cabbages. These white cabbage, and they did last fairly well. The carrots usually went soft after a while, but of course, like a place on the Smalls, you couldn't bury them in a box of soil, you see, which would have kept them quite well. And so we did actually have a lot of tinned stuff, you see, tinned veg as well. Usually as well, what we did was we bought a leg of lamb each, and of course you cooked that. You had to cook that leg of lamb straight away, and then you were eating cold lamb then until it went. So of course that's put me off cold lamb for ever since. I don't like cold lamb anymore. But and then when your meat was, you also bought a side of bacon or a piece of bacon and then you cut it according to your want. If you bought the rashers of bacon, of course, they wouldn't last as long as the piece of bacon, you see, and so it was just a standard practice then. When the fridges came in, of course, obviously, then it made life a little bit easier.
Most keepers drink tea. What about fresh milk out there?
Well, at that time in the 50s, of course, I think lots of people had the condensed milk was the great thing then, you see, and most keepers enjoyed their condensed milk, and we used to use that. We also had evaporated milk, which you could water down, and but it used to make excellent custard, actually. And fresh milk, of course, was more or less out of the question, really.
Right, you were telling me once about on the Smalls where the old stumps of the old lighthouse are. You went for a sunbathe. You remember that?
Oh yes, that's right. Um, it was my afternoon in bed actually, and I thought I'll go down on the landing. It was a glorious day, and I took my life jacket down, and I sat down the landing there, and eventually I put the life jacket under my head, and I dozed off. And what woke me up actually was my hand was in a pool of water, one of the holes in the rock where the old Smalls was built, where the old pile was a wooden pile was in this hole, and it was my hand was cold, and that's what woke me up. It was full of water, of course, this hole, and my watch was still going. I remember that clearly. And then I stood up, and it was still a glorious afternoon, flat calm, and I looked out on the horizon, and there was this little lump out on the horizon. It was right across the horizon, and I watched it, and it seemed to be getting closer, and there was no wave top or anything on it. It was just a lump, and I thought, well, I'll get to the base of the tower, and I went up the steps a bit and watched it coming closer and closer, and it was coming quite slowly, and eventually when it hit the rock, it went right over the rock, right around the bottom of the tower, and if I'd been sleeping there still on the rock, I'd have gone. And then after that it was absolutely flat calm again all afternoon. It was as if nothing had ever happened. It was absolutely glorious, but there was just that one ripple, and it hit the rock with quite a force and straight over, and washed the rock completely.
So that was like a tidal wave out of nowhere.
Well, yes, that's right. Yes, it was. And apparently, I've heard this happening before. With keepers on the longships. Apparently, there were two keepers one day. They were there. They were both fishing and were on opposite sides of the rocks. And this tidal wave, not tidal wave, but this ripple came along, and apparently it washed one of the keepers off completely, and they never saw him again. And it didn't touch the other one. Of course, he was in a better position, and he never even noticed the other keeper had gone, apparently, until some time later. Mm.
Did that one drown then?
Yes, apparently, yes. Well, he disappeared. Somebody told me that we've lost about 12 keepers from longships. I don't know how true that is, but over the years, 12 keepers, they reckon, have lost.
You went to Skokholm.
Yes, I did 2 stints at Skokholm, actually. I did one 6-year stint there as AK, assistant keeper, and then a few years later I went back there as principal keeper for 5 years. So I did 11 years at Skokholm altogether.
That was a fairly big island, wasn't it?
It was, yes, that's right. It's about 3 miles long, I think. It was about 3... No, it wouldn't be 3 miles long. It would be about perhaps 1.5 miles long, sorry. I was mixing it up with Lundy. 1.5 miles long by about nearly 3/4 mile wide. And it was a lovely island. The lighthouse was up at one end, and the bird observatory was down at the other end. And the landing actually was a mile from the lighthouse where we landed. And all around the lighthouse there, a huge colony of shearwaters. And if you weren't interested in bird watching or, you know, as a lighthouse keeper, you usually got interested in, you know, in the antics of the birds. You know, you were in a sort of a privileged position, really, because you were right in the middle of things when with all the different seabirds coming in and so forth, and of course all the shearwaters used to come in at night time, and you were right on the spot there when they came in, and if you were outside, they flew past your head. You're there coming into their nests. They nest in the ground in the rabbit holes, and they came in to feed their young and so forth, and it was quite a sight.
What's this about having rabbits for the pot on Skerries? Skocum, sorry.
Oh, and well, we used to shoot the rabbits then at one time there, and we at one time there we used to shoot rabbits for the. We had the Royal Navy helicopter used to pop out to us now and again. Well, fairly often with mail, and they used to we used to shoot some rabbits for them and skin them, and they used to go on their way rejoicing. And then of course obviously some keepers liked rabbit as well, and they used to fill the fridge with like L.O. Williams was one, of course. He used to fill the fridge with rabbit, and he thoroughly enjoyed his rabbits there.
What was this Bob Ratty was telling me about you and this famous rabbit you chased?
Oh, oh God, I went out one day to shoot a rabbit and to shoot some rabbits, and I crept up onto a little hill there and peeped over the hill, and there was this rabbit there down there, and so he had his back to me, and of course I thought, oh well, I can't shoot him in the back, you know, sort of thing. So I thought I did a cough, like, and so he didn't hear me. So I did another cough. So he turned his head around, and of course I shot him. But I put the gun down, and then I ran down the slope, and I saw the rabbit fall, you know, and then as I ran down the slope, this rabbit started running, and of course I chased after it, and of course I must have frightened it because I chased him out of his run, and with the dry bracken there, of course he got tangled up in the bracken, and so I practically fell on top of him because I tripped on the bracken as well. So I caught him, and I gave him the old chop, like, and as I was walking back to pick up the gun, the rabbit that I had actually shot was lying on top of his hole there. He was dead as well, so I got two for the price of one.
So you chased a healthy rabbit?
I did, yeah. That's it.
Skocum, it had some dumper truck, did it?
Yes, it did. As the landing was a mile from the lighthouse, we, of course, obviously we had to have some mechanical means to get all our gear up to the lighthouse, and we had a dumper truck there with rear wheel steering, and it was quite a thing to handle if you weren't used to it. You see, of course, obviously with rear wheel steering, lots of people thought, oh yeah, this will be fine. You know, I can drive, and of course, when they got up and started to steer it, of course, they went all over the place because the least little turn of the back wheels, and you went round in circles, and So it was quite a handy thing. Before that, they had another dumper there, but I'm not sure if it was a petrol dumper, the other one, the one before that, and there was only a three-wheeler, which wasn't very good. And then before that, of course, they had a horse, the old horse there was, and he's actually buried on the island. And they used to tackle him up, sort of thing, on the day of relief, and go down. And he used to take all the gear up to landing, but he became very, very independent, because apparently, so they tell me, that he knew the day of relief, and of course when he went, the keepers, when they went to look for him on the day of relief, he'd be standing in the middle of the pond, and so that they wouldn't catch him. See, so what they had to do eventually was they had to hobble him the night before relief was, and so that they wouldn't waste any time going down to the landing. Then
Did they have a bit of a railway track system out there? Or?
yes, they did. This was the with the horse. You see, they had a sort of a bogie there, and the horse used to pull this bogie thing, and that it disappeared then, of course, when they got the when Sugar died, of course. There is a gravestone there by the pond, where still actually, and then the track, they pulled the track up apparently, and they got this mechanical dumper then, and that was going for quite a while. But the only thing with it was that the actual skip in it was it used to have a mind of its own. You'd load up all your stuff apparently from the ship, and you'd be going along there minding your own business, and the damn thing would all of a sudden to tip up, you see, for no apparent reason, and then you had to fill it all up again. But then the second dumper they had then, that was quite a blessing. That was excellent.
Now the Wolf. Can you describe what it was like on the Wolf?
Well, the Wolf wasn't all that comfortable. It was it was my first winter there. Actually, was extremely cold, and we had Calagas heating there. Calagas stove, and in the bedroom there, where the bunks were, we had a sort of a Calagas blower with a long tube in it, which you had to, before you went to bed, you put that in underneath the clothes, and you warmed up your bedclothes, and it was. There wasn't a lot of room, as I say, anywhere really, because it had the being a tower rock, of course, everything was a bit cramped. The thing was, in the lantern itself, it only had a small lens, because they took out the old lens, I believe, and this was a nice small lens, and you could actually sit in the lantern during the daytime. And we brought up an armchair there, and it was you could see, you had a wonderful view during the daytime, especially on a nice day. The seas, of course, obviously used to come right over the Wolf. That hit the base of the rock and come right over the top. See, a lot of the time. And the tower would shake as well with the force of the sea, And then as the sea got up past the bedroom window, your ears would go pop. There's a sort of a vacuum created. And you had to be careful when you went out on the gallery at night time, perhaps, and you couldn't see actually what was happening. If you went out to take your weather, you'd open the gallery door and you'd probably see a wave shooting way up past you, you see. So you didn't go any further than that.
And what height was that?
Well, it would be about, it's supposed to be about perhaps 150 feet high, perhaps, or something like that. And but of course, in the daytime, you actually saw what was happening, you know, and you were you could judge where you could judge your time to go out on the gallery or up onto the helicopter pad. That was again, that was right on top of the lighthouse, and you could sunbathe up there on a glorious day, or have a read, or some of the lads, one or two of the lads, used to run around the pad for exercise, round and round.
This pad, did you lose many bits of it during storms?
Yes, when, as I said, these waves used to come up, they'd go straight up, and the helipad itself, part of the helipad, was actually constructed in such a way that it was in pieces. The gratings were in about perhaps 2 foot by 1, something like that, or maybe 3 foot by 2 or something like that. Pieces, so that, and they were held together. They were held in by aluminium pins, so that when the seas came up, really came up and hit the bottom, one of these might break off to shear the aluminium pin, and a piece of the pad would just fall off, to either just lift maybe if you were lucky, or to go completely over the side. If it only just lifted, you went round the next day with a lump hammer, and you just hammered them all down again. But apparently, after I left there, the helicopter had some. There was quite a bad storm down there, and the helicopter went out with replacement pieces, and they couldn't actually land on the pad. They had to hover about a foot or two above the pad while somebody jumped down and from the helicopter and started putting these pieces back into place again, because the helicopter didn't have any room to put its wheels. It skids down.
You had boat reliefs there as well, didn't you?
We did have, one boat relief there, made by local boat. In actual fact, we rigged the landing there on a very quiet day, and we had a mechanic who'd been with us for a couple of weeks, and he was going ashore, and this local boat came out, and the helicopter wasn't available at that particular time, and the local boat did it and managed to get him off. It was a bit hairy because he had to jump from the steps onto the rubber dinghy, and if he'd missed his footing, of course, obviously he'd have gone. But and then they also had some stuff to land to us as well, and we picked it all up. We pulled it all in by hand winch. You see, it took us about perhaps about 20 minutes to rig the winch, on the landing. When the ship used to do a regular landing on the Wolf, the lads were quite adept at lowering all this gear and fitting it all up and so forth. They used to do it in so many minutes, you see, but of course we weren't all that used to it because it was all helicopter with us, and it took us about 20 minutes there to rig it all up and get it all sorted out. And that was the one time, but the actual none of the Trinity ships actually went did a relief there while I was there, since the helicopter came along. They always went past, sort of thing, and left the reliefs, things like that, to the helicopter.
Can you remember how it was rigged?
Now then, we had, of course, the Samson post was a permanent feature on the landing, and then we had to, you had a long boom then that you had up in the tower, that you stored up in the tower, and there were all these pulleys and ropes, sort of thing, and you attached the boom to the Samson post, and you got your various shackles, your various blocks, and tied them up, hooked them on, and so forth. And then, of course, you had to put the drum on and the handles and all that sort of thing. And as I say, it took, between the two of you, it took quite a while to sort it all out. You see, especially if it wasn't a very nice landing, you know, there, if there was a little bit of a slop there, you see, because you had to do it, of course, obviously at low water, and even low water, then sometimes you still got it slopped over the landing. So you had to keep a very close eye on it, on the conditions. Then you had you threw a line then to the boat, which you had tied onto the hook on the end of the boom, and the boat pulled in the hook, and they attached something onto the hook, and then you pulled it, you hand winched it from the boat in. You see, of course, obviously it would might float in the water, of course, if the people in the boat didn't keep it fairly taut. But they had to leave enough slack in it for you to be able to wind it in.
So you winched from the boat to the landing.
Yes.
How did you get it from the landing up into the lighthouse?
And then we got it. Then we had an electric winch then in the what we call the winch room, and we got that up. We got it up there. You see, we got it up into the winch room, and then sorted it out from there. You see.
So it's quite a sort of rigmarole for getting stuff on.
Oh yes, it was indeed. As a matter, and any big stuff that came by helicopter, of course. Then I remember one fridge freezer we had to lower it over. The helicopter brought it out, and we had to lower it over the side with rope over the edge of the helipad, and drop it down on the outside of the tower, right onto the winchroom door, and then pull it in the winchroom door, because no way could we get it down the hatches in the helipad. We had two hatches, I think. Was it 2 hatches or 3 in the helipad, I think, and they were only just enough, more or less, to get small stuff down, or little boxes, and of course personnel.
You were saying once about some dolphins around the wall.
Oh yes, and the wolf, looked out one day, and there were these groups of dolphins going past, and more or less they kept going past all day. It was absolutely amazing. There were groups of them, as if they were going somewhere to a function or something. And about perhaps maybe a dozen or so in each group or whatever, maybe half dozen, a dozen, and they were going past, but more or less all day they were going all in the same direction. And then 1 or 2 days later, we saw all around the Wolf, the dolphins. They were all gathered all around the Wolf, actually, all just as if they were waiting for something. And there were hundreds of them there, and they were just seemed to be playing, just breaking the surface and going down again. And they were all in a circle all around the Wolf, and then they just all of a sudden they disappeared. They were all gone. And as I said, there must have been hundreds upon hundreds of them there, and of course I didn't have my camera, as usual, the usual story.
Right, thanks very much. Hope you enjoy your retirement.
Oh, thank you. I think I will.